what's the difference between dementia, Alzheimer's disease, and Parkinson's disease? Let's break it down now, y'all. Let's start off with dementia. Now, dementia it's just a word. It's just a word that we use. It's an umbrella term, meaning that lots of different things fall under it. And dementia is just a word that we use to describe a whole group of symptoms that are associated with decreasing brain health. Crucially, in order to be classified as dementia, these symptoms will have to combine up to a point where you can no longer go about your day-to-day life as you used to. That's really critical in order to get a diagnosis of dementia. Now, dementia is caused by different physical diseases of the brain. The most common disease which causes dementia is Alzheimer's disease. So let's get into that now. Alzheimer's disease is characterized by the formation of clumps of two different proteins in the brain. The first of these proteins is amyloid beta. This misfolds and forms these clumps called plaques, and that happens outside nerve cells in the brain. These changes start happening decades before somebody starts showing any symptoms. And then later down the line, we see the addition of misfolded clumps, tangles they're called, of tau protein. And this happens inside nerve cells in the brain. And this causes the death of brain cells, and this spreads throughout the brain, making someone's symptoms worse and worse, depending on the areas of the brain that are affected. Now, when we think of Alzheimer's disease, one of the things we think of first and foremost is memory loss. And that's because one of the really heavily affected areas of the brain in Alzheimer's disease is called the hippocampus. The hippocampus is located just about there, and it's involved in short-term memory formation. And this is incredibly heavily affected in Alzheimer's disease, which is why we see memory loss as one of the earlier symptoms. But importantly, not all dementias have to involve memory loss, certainly not at the early stages. So things like frontotemporal dementia, usually that's very much behaviour or language changes that come about first. So let's move on to Parkinson's disease. Now, we know that a lot of people with Parkinson's disease do go on to develop dementia. Parkinson's disease is a neurodegenerative disease, meaning loss of brain cells, and it's a movement disorder. So why is it a movement disorder? Well, one of the areas of the brain that's affected very early on in Parkinson's disease is called the substantia nigra, black substance it means. And this black substance, neuromelanin, is a byproduct of specific type of brain cells called dopaminergic neurons. Dopaminergic neurons produce dopamine, and dopamine is incredibly important for our ability to move our muscles, voluntary movement it's involved in. But also dopamine is important in mood regulation, which is why we see quite frequently mood problems later down the line in Parkinson's disease. So we see the death of these dopaminergic neurons in the substantia nigra, and this leads to problems with movement. And then we don't really know why some people with Parkinson's disease do and some people don't go on to develop dementia. It could be a case of how far out in the brain these clumps of proteins are folding. In Parkinson's disease, we also have clumps of protein. These clumps are called Lewy bodies, and they're made up of a protein called alpha-synuclein. And these are the same clumps that are involved in dementia with Lewy bodies and Parkinson's disease dementia as well. So there's lots of different diseases, and really importantly, the best way to define diseases is under a microscope. You see the molecular changes, which is what gives you the definition of that disease. But the really tricky thing with dementia is that obviously you can't look at someone's brain under a microscope while they're alive, so you have to use brain scans and clinical symptoms to give as good a guess as you can. But hopefully that answers your question as to what the difference between those three things is. Thank you for watching. Have a wonderful evening. Bye-bye.